Welcome to See You on the Other Side, where the world of the mysterious collides with the world of entertainment. A discussion of art, music, movies, spirituality, the weird, and self-discovery. And now, your hosts, musicians and entertainers who have their own weakness for the weird, Mike and Wendy from the band Sunspot.
Welcome to See You on the Other Side. Today we have with us our good friend Brian J. Showers, who is an author and publisher at Swan River Press in Dublin, Ireland. How you doing?
And
today?
our first international guest.
Yes, this is our first international guest. Yep.
Yeah.
Sort of.
Yeah. So in full disclosure, we know Brian from college at the University of Wisconsin and film classes, TV shows, and countless strange parties and things like that in time. And
very strange.
Yeah. No, and Brian's a guy who's a horror author, ghost story, some really cool stuff. Anyway, we're going to talk more about that. Either way, Brian, welcome to the show. And how'd you get into weird stuff in the first place?
Yeah, let's talk about some ghosts.
Yeah, I like it.
You know what? Whenever this question comes up, and when I've interviewed some people, I've asked the same question, and I'm gonna have to go with "I was born this way."
Okay, good.
Well, seriously, think about it. Like when did you become interested in aliens and UFOs? You know, like when you're 3 years old, it's kind of like, if this doesn't have an alien in it, I'm out.
Right, I'm definitely out. I remember the first UFO book I read, Fat Men from Space, and about a bunch of fat guys from space that came to Earth to try to steal our potato pancakes. And that set a template for all the books I wanted to read in the future.
You were that kid in middle school that was always at the lake monster and Bigfoot section of the library.
Yeah, no, completely. Like by the time I'd gotten to be 12 years old, I'd exhausted the resources of the Big Bend Public Library and moved to the Waukesha Library to try to. I mean, I was a geek that ate everything I could about weird stuff.
Yeah, pyramids, crystal skulls, in search of. I mean, it was all there. Yeah. I think it's all part of the same thing, though, too, isn't it? That sort of mystery and the unexplained and the unknown. And depending on whether you become a Sasquatchologist or a ufologist or into ghosts, I think it all sort of springs from the same place, though.
Right,
Sure.
and it's those things are, we're at a point where we have the answers to so many questions. So the things that we don't have answers to are just that much more fun. It's like
Well, and sometimes I like those weird answers better. Like every day the moon eats the sun or whatever, and the sun's like that's more exciting. We're just revolving around the thing and this cold, uncaring Lovecraftian
or even
universe.
the lack of answers.
Yes, exactly.
I think that's key to the supernatural, and that's kind of what sets it apart from a mystery story. As a mystery story, you get a nice little answer at the end, but I think in a good supernatural tale, there's just no answer.
So
and
it's
usually, well, it's usually it's the case where, people that really love ghost stories, if they do get an answer, to the ghost story, like it turns out that the Scooby-Doo ending,
Right.
This'll
Right.
upset people. They prefer to have that mystery maintained, I think.
yeah,
It's a certain sort of sensibility.
in those types of stories too, it's fun because since there isn't an answer, often the answer is created by someone's imagination. So it's
Right.
it's fun. I don't know. I like that stuff.
If the UFO is just going to be swamp gas, then I don't care. It's
Exactly.
right. It's those are lights from passing cars.
Oh, I know. Yeah. Disappointing.
Wait, hold on. Speaking of UFO stories, real quick, our guitar player sent me a message on Friday night that he had seen a UFO.
Ben sees UFOs like twice a week.
Yeah, so right. Depends on how many beers he's had.
Actually, I see them all the time too.
He's like, totally just saw a UFO. Way too low and bright to be a satellite, too high to be an airplane, and the lights were facing the wrong way. And then it just disappeared. Eastern sky looking out my backyard. And so I can imagine him. He's sitting on the porch having a drink or whatever, and then he sees it, and then he's like, I'm like, why? Take a picture of it. Don't text me about it.
But okay, I'm a little bit nearsighted. So sometimes I'll see something in the sky and I'm like, what? It's not like normal airplane lights. What is that? But it's just because of the angle or whatever. But initially my reaction is like, is that an alien?
Right. This could be my moment.
I assume I don't know what it is, but someone else probably does.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Well, and around here, there's a lot of like military weird stuff. I mean, not weird stuff, but things you don't see every day.
Yeah.
At night and stuff like that. Sometimes I'll see interesting things. But that's sweet that Ben saw a UFO.
So Ben, it's just a little sidetrack there. But Brian, though, your family, do your parents or anything into weird stuff, or your siblings?
Nope. So they couldn't be any less weird. My entire family is pretty on the level. A lot of engineers, that sort of thing.
Okay. No psychics.
I don't think so. No.
Okay. No. So what were some of the ghost stories and stuff that you read early on that kind of influenced you to get into literature, publishing, things like that?
Oh, man. I think, do you remember this book? And we talked about it the other day, Haunted Wisconsin.
Absolutely. Haunted Wisconsin.
Yeah.
It's on my sister. I'm at my sister's house in Milwaukee right now, and it's on my sister's bookshelf, like 8 yards
Scott
away.
Michael Norman.
And we've talked about that in other episodes too. That's pretty influential reading.
It's a great book, yeah. And it's and it was just for whatever reason my normal parents had this on the bookshelf, and I picked it up. And again, it's a little bit different. It's not a literary ghost story. It's they're not necessarily cast as true either, but they're folkloric retellings of these sorts of things, like the Ridgeway Phantom. But I think what I really liked was that this stuff was down the block. Mm-hmm. Like when you're reading the Lake Monster book and you come across that mention of the Lake Monster and Lake Monona, that's what's really cool. That's when you're kind of like, hey, I could just go down there and dangle toes in the water.
It feels more real because the places are things you're familiar with. It's not just like
exactly.
And
that was one of them.
That's funny about the dangling your toes in the water, though, because that's a story about one of the Lake Monster stories.
The tickling
at Picnic Point. Yeah, the girl's feet were like being licked by what she described as a dragon. They were at Picnic Point, and she's like, "Well, I wasn't scared because it had kind eyes." And I'm like,
"Oh no, it's totally cool.
It's
fine.
Go
ahead.
A dragon licking my feet. I don't care how kind its eyes were. I'd run. I'm gonna go. He's gonna eat me. He's already started on the feet. Like he's
What's so weird? What's so weird, dude?
My feet.
It's just a dragon.
Whenever I eat chicken, I just lick it first too. So
But if he had mean eyes,
right,
then it's time to run.
But that's the kind of that's great. That's great though, Brian. You're reading about stuff that could be, so often in literature and in movies and everything like that, everything takes place in Los Angeles and New York, obviously, where the production centers are. So to have those stories in your own town makes it so much more interesting than, so Haunted Wisconsin was one of the first ones that really got you.
Yeah, and Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark is another one.
Okay.
Which I think, nearly everyone our age grew up with. And the other thing I noticed about that one too is the guy that wrote that, Alvin Schwartz, he was definitely a folklorist. I think they're just so well written, the Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark series, not to mention the illustrations, which has stuck with everyone. And then John Bellairs.
I don't know if I've read any of stuff.
Oh, John Bellairs was he was a children's writer, a young adult writer, and his famous novel is called The House with the Clock in Its Walls. It's basically and it's set in Michigan, so it's very Midwestern.
Okay, so it's already scary because they're in Michigan. Right?
But
hey, a little dig.
I haven't been to Michigan, but I've not been to Transylvania either, and I just assume there's weird stuff going on over there.
Yeah, you're right, there is.
The John Bellairs novels, and again, this goes right back to childhood, and the stuff that you sort of encounter first, and then you move on to Stephen King, and then you graduate from Stephen King into to Lovecraft, and then from there it's all Algernon Blackwood and Arthur Machen.
Right. Well, Wendy just had her first brush with Lovecraft last week.
No kidding.
Yeah.
What did you think?
Oh,
was he licking your feet?
Yeah.
that would have been a much more pleasant experience. It was like I had my morning coffee, and I'm like, I'm going to read this story. It was my assignment. I was kind of excited to get some, reading in, and oh my gosh, it was so dark and like heavy and creepy and like not and racist, and it was like all the bad things. I read the horror at Sandy Hook.
Red Hook.
Red Hook.
Sandy Hook was a different horror altogether.
Sandy Hook, that's up there near Appleton, isn't it?
I think it is.
Oh, yeah.
It's a bar. There's a bar in Wisconsin, like southern Wisconsin, called that.
Well, it's also where all those children were murdered.
Right, I know. Which, like, so after that happened, and then a bunch of our friends in bands kept playing at that bar. I'm like, that bar might want to rethink their
name. Like
naming scheme.
Sandy Hook does not give people nice thoughts anymore.
That's really sad. Yeah. So anyway, I read the story, and it was interesting, definitely, and I could like the whole macabre thing.
Yeah.
Definitely, like it just gave you that feeling of like, ugh. But it was. I guess I should read a different. What would you guys recommend for my second Lovecraftian experience if I were to dip back into the well?
I like The Strange Case of Charles Dexter Ward.
That's a long one.
It's a long one, but you get into the characters, so that's a nice one.
Okay.
I think The Shadow over Innsmouth is a great story.
Okay.
I mean, it's got everything Lovecraftian in it that you'd ever want, and there's even an action sequence which he rarely wrote.
Yeah, that's a classic.
Okay, well, sorry, I didn't mean to go off on a tangent, but I do have all the full works now of Lovecraft because I bought for the Kindle, so I might as well go and
might as well do it. Yeah, it's so good.
Take another stab at it.
Well, and then so if you find that you like that, there's a great one, Herbert West Reanimator, and then they made a movie. A guy from Wisconsin, a guy from UW, who I've interviewed on several different occasions for different publications, and he's been to the Wisconsin Horror Film Festival and everything. Directed the movie based on H.P. Lovecraft's Reanimator.
Oh, that's cool.
And
it all comes back to Wisconsin eventually.
It does have
the Wisconsin connection.
Yeah, he's got a bunch of.
Oh, seriously, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, even you find that even in Ireland.
Well, just briefly back to Lovecraft.
Okay.
You know that his first publisher is a Wisconsinite. He's from Sauk City, Arkham House.
Yeah, we talked about that last week, actually.
Yeah, so his first book publications are from Wisconsin. Like, you can drive up there and see it's called Place of Hawks, where August Derleth used to live.
I intend to do that. After hearing that, I'm like, that's so cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
I like to, whenever I drove over the August Derleth Memorial Bridge, picture that Lulu's going to come out and just, like, subsume my car.
Lick the tires.
Yeah, that would be, actually in Sauk City, that'd be an improvement. But, Wisconsin does have a lot of weird stuff. And so,
absolutely,
being influenced by that. So then, Brian, when you moved to Dublin, what did you find like a open kind of community to that kind of thing already there?
There's a lot of overlooked Irish authors of the macabre they're just, for one reason or another, they don't get a look into the Irish literary scene. Because everyone knows the big names like Joyce, even though I suspect not as many people read him. Right. Beckett, Sean Casey. There's a lot of George Bernard Shaw. Actually, he's not big around here either. He was just born down the block from here. But there's a lot of guys that you really wouldn't know of or even think that they're Irish. Like, I suppose he's not really a horror writer, but Lord Dunsany, the fantasy writer. Yeah. And then Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu, who is probably like a precursor to M.R. James. He was a ghost story writer as well. And he is buried just down the block from here.
Well, and he pretty much was like created the template for the ghost stories in the Victorian novels, right?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that. Yeah, absolutely. He's sort of the progenitor of the psychological ghost story.
What do you mean? What do you mean by psychological ghost story?
The sort of story where you've got a guy who's, you don't know whether the supernatural force is something that's external or something that's welling up from deep within him. Someone who's carrying around guilt that just sort of manifests itself as a little monkey. If you've read Green Tea, it sounds ridiculous, but it's a terrifying story. And I secretly suspect, by the way, that the monkey in Chris Griffin's closet in Family Guy is a reference to LeFanu's.
Really?
I'm fairly certain it's a LeFanu reference.
And even if it's not a LeFanu reference, it is now.
Yeah, exactly.
You know?
You just made it one.
Yeah, that's a thing. We could make a meme out of that. And it would only be fans of the Victorian novel would be like, yeah, and everybody else be like, what the? So cool. And what do you think was what was the stuff that he was inspired by to kind of create that? Because those are the stories when you talk about the Victorian ghost stories. That's, I mean, the foundation of a lot of our ideas of what a haunted house story is supposed to be. And so what were some of the things that influenced him?
I think you can find, well, he liked Walter Scott quite a bit.
Okay.
Which didn't necessarily inform his ghost stories. But I suspect he read Poe thoroughly, as everyone did.
Sure.
And the frustrating thing about LeFanu is he didn't leave a lot of manuscripts. He had an alcoholic, wayward son who died quite early. Died just a few years after his father did. But all of his diaries and manuscripts and everything were sort of dispersed and lost. So we don't have any of that stuff. As we would for Lovecraft. It would be a great example of
where we have his letters and
manuscripts, everything. So we know exactly what he was thinking, what his philosophy was. But LeFanu is a bit more elusive, I think. But he would have read Poe, and it's actually quite interesting because he kind of slots in right between Poe and Stoker. I guess would be the big milestones on either side, and where LeFanu might have been sort of taking a few notes from Poe. I think Stoker definitely took a few, stole a few moves from LeFanu.
Well, did anything like happen to him that would drive him to these interesting things? Did he see any stories of him seeing anything weird, like a UFO in his backyard? Or
like Ben?
Yeah, that would maybe have inspired him to be interested in the macabre.
Well, yeah. Again, this is the same question, though, isn't it? I mean, it's why are people drawn aesthetically to the things that they're drawn to? I mean, they just are. I mean, are you talking about his wife's death? Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, just like little things. Like later, I wanted to talk a little bit about Harry Houdini, and there's a very clear line from Houdini's mother's death to him seeking out spiritualism. And so did LeFanu have any of that in his life?
Yeah, well, his wife, Susanna, died at an early age, and he sort of felt quite a bit of guilt after that. And there was a long period where, I mean, his writing was basically, can be broken into a couple of different periods where, it was before his wife died and after his wife died. And after his wife died, he had a number of children that he was supporting, so he just started writing novel after novel after novel.
Yeah,
just as a way to support his family. Yeah, but he also owned some magazines and newspapers, and he was kind of writing his own copy. And during this period too, I mean, he became less and less social. I don't think he was necessarily a recluse, but it kind of went in that direction. So yeah, I mean, something like that. Of course, your wife dying, that's got to have a profound effect on you.
Yeah, no, that sounds like a big one.
Yeah.
But I mean, you were talking about him being, you said just buried down the street.
Yeah.
And
well, I had a great experience with when I first moved here, and I didn't move to Ireland for any reason. I just I picked up with Adam Savage.
That's right, another college friend.
And Adam and I just moved here. It just seemed like the sensible thing to do.
Well, you were thinking,
why wouldn't you?
You loved U2. I love Guinness. I love U2. I'm going to Dublin.
Hey, and I think what's his face is not too far from here too. We could probably phone him up. But times are tough here too. I saw him working construction. Bono. He was yeah.
You could tell because he had the wraparound sunglasses under his helmet.
And the chartreuse vest on. But no, I when I moved here, I didn't. There are all of these Irish authors of the macabre, and I had been familiar with Le Fanu before I moved here. But it wasn't until I moved here, and it was just within a few months that for whatever reason, I picked up a biography of him, and I started reading it. And I got to the part where he died. As happens in a biography.
Right, reach the end.
And it said where he was buried at Mount Jerome Cemetery. And I clearly remember I was in a Georgian house on Palmerston Road at the time, sitting in front of the window. And it was, Monday afternoon or whatever. And I just thought, wait a second, that cemetery is just, down the way. I can go there right now. So I did. I put the book down and I actually pushed it into a bag and I took a hike and I went down to the cemetery and I found him.
What? And connect that to haunted Wisconsin. It's just like saying I can go to Lake Monona right now and get my toes licked by a lake monster. So you're like, I can go see where this guy was buried. And then it's that connection to. There's folklore there. You're reading about something that happened in the place you are, and that's exciting. Yep. That's exciting in its own right.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, I wanted to get into that because it's like buried down the street. Now, when you wrote your book, you were and all the ghost stories. You were inspired by your neighborhood in Dublin.
The Bleeding Horse, yeah, The Bleeding Horse and Other Ghost Stories, which wasn't my title, by the way. It was meant to be called Ghost Stories of Rathmines, which was a play on one of Le Fanu's triptych stories called Ghost Stories of Chapel Izard, which is a Dublin suburb on the north side. So I thought, right, I'm going to write Ghost Stories of Rathmines, and I'm going to write 3 short little stories all about the neighborhood that I live in. Well, it turned into an entire book worth of stories. Wow. And so what I did is I sort of looked at the history of the neighborhood. I mean, I didn't look at any of the folklore or any of the ghost stories that existed, and most of the supernatural occurrences are completely made up. But it was sort of driven by this interest in you walk by a house, right, an abandoned house or something that kind of looks a little bit odd, and you're like, God, I wish something cool happened there. Maybe it's haunted, right? So I started making up stories about the places that I was passing every day that I was seeing that I could have some sort of connection with. And then the more I looked into the history of the neighborhood, the more I was able to sort of think, you don't have to really make a lot of stuff up all the time. You can just, so I started swiping bits from history. I started making stuff up, and I came up with this mishmash of it's a bag of lies based on history, I guess. Okay,
so what do you think is your favorite history that you created a bag of lies from? Like, what little piece did you, did you find the most inspiring, or you're like, this really leads?
A big old sack of BS, yeah. Like I said, you don't have to look very hard to find these things, but one of them was there was an omnibus accident at the canal, because I live just near the Grand Canal here in Dublin. Dublin has 2 canals. There's the Royal Canal on the north side and the Grand Canal on the south side. And there was, I think it was 1871, there was this horribly tragic omnibus accident where the omnibus sort of backed in.
Real quick,
the horses were...
Real quick, what's an omnibus?
An omnibus would be like a public coach. It's basically a horse-drawn carriage, but it was a public, just like a bus.
It's like the mega bus of your
with
and horses instead.
Yeah. Okay, really? It was still $1 a ride or whatever.
So Mike is a frequenter of the megabus, and he's always got great stories. So it's just like I'm trying to think of the equivalent of the
poor bastard that had to grab
the driver chastising people, and the people on their phones like yelling at their kids, and I don't know.
Right, and always yelling up, "You can't smoke in the bus." And I'm like, "Who's smoking in the? What is this, 1972? What are you doing? Can't wait
Just
for the rest of
filling up the cab with plumes of smoke."
Right, and then she's just like, "Well, I'm going to call the state trooper," and I'm like, "Can't we just get to our destination for Christ's sake?" Anyway, so an omnibus accident happened in 1871, and please continue. Backed up.
Yeah, well, please proceed.
Back on track.
Well, something spooked the horses, and the horses sort of backed up, and I guess it jackknifed or something like that. And the omnibus went into the lock, because the canal has these locks all along it. So it went into the lock, which was filled up, and everyone drowned.
Oh my gosh, that's horrible.
It's your typical tragedy. There were men, women, children. So I thought, right, well, let's make up a story about this. What spooked the horses, for one?
So
good question.
What spooked the horses? Or do we have to?
Well, in my story.
Yeah, right.
Right.
So
Come on, Mike.
I'm trying to sell a book here, Mike.
Okay. But
Leave some mystery.
that's the thing, though. But that's where you take you take real history and create like events surrounding it, and that's a fun way to, number one, learn about the Wrath Mines. And why is it called the Wrath Mines? So there used to be a mine there, like an angry mine.
No. There was a castle. Mines would have been the family, or like a corruption of the original family, and a wrath is just a castle.
Okay.
Like a fairy wrath, it's like a fort. Not necessarily, one of these big castles that Dracula lives in, but a smaller sort of defensive fort.
Okay.
So that was but yeah, I mean it's a way. It's just a way for me to not be bored when I'm walking to work.
Okay, that's a good way to put it. I mean,
Yeah.
But yeah, it's kind of like going back to what we were talking about before, where there's questions that we just don't have the answers to, and we never will. So you use your imagination, and you think of different answers. Yeah, exactly.
Well, and when you're a little kid, and I mean, in my hometown, we never had any. I mean, I guess there was a couple of abandoned houses, but not like in the neighborhood or anything. But you always have that idea about the abandoned house, or I mean, I guess there wasn't, by my high school, there was like an abandoned farmhouse where, you go play the Ouija board and stuff like that. You think of the generations of kids that played the Ouija board here before. And
yes, thank you, Parker Brothers.
Yeah, or the Haunchies,
Thank you, Parker Brothers, for giving our children a portal into the
right and
the other side.
And when you talk to, I interact with various mediums and psychics on Twitter now, and that's part of the job description, I guess. But the thing is, they're always like, "Don't you touch the the Ouija." They act like the Ouija board really is a gate to hell. They're like, "Oh,
well." I was just gonna say, and it can be, right? I mean,
right? It just makes me laugh when they're just like,
but you should. I mean,
you're not going to sell that at KB Toys. It's like, hey, check out, you can get a gate to hell for $7.99 this week.
No, I remember as. I do remember as a child, though, like we were super excited. We totally wanted to get that, because one of our friends had it, and then we did get it, and then it terrified me, and I never touched it again. And
right. Well, there's another. I mean, Brian just made a good point when he said Captain Howdy, because there's a connection to The Exorcist, because they're playing with the Ouija. Yeah. When we were talking about The Exorcist last week, because we were talking about Pazuzu being based on the peacock angel of the Yazidi people in Kurdistan. And I realized I just said a whole bunch of words that most people will have no idea.
It almost sounded like you were speaking a foreign language for a second there.
Right. Yazidi.
I get you. I'm
Kurdistan. With you. Right. But yeah, they're playing with the Ouija board in The Exorcist. And Captain Howdy shows up, and Dee Snider wrote a song called Captain Howdy that's on Stay Hungry, which is Twisted Sister's biggest album. And eventually he made a movie called Strangeland. And I think the bad guy's called guy's called Captain Howdy in Strangeland. And so if you guys don't remember, in The Exorcist, Captain Howdy is the person that is the entity that they're talking to on the Ouija board that Reagan and her friends are, and that eventually, that becomes Pazuzu, takes over Reagan, makes her head spin around and vomit pea soup all over the place.
I tell you, when I meet Max von Sydow, I really hope that doesn't happen to me.
Right. If he I'm always amazed by how old, I thought Christopher Plummer was dead. He's still kicking around in a movie. Max von Sydow, he's in the new Star Wars movie. And
is he?
Yeah.
Angela Lansbury's still alive, too.
Holy crap.
What?
Yeah, she just won an award recently.
Yeah, for living forever.
You win. Congratulations.
Yeah.
You've lived longer than everyone.
Angela Lansbury. Wow. Great. Well.
Who was in the picture of Dorian Gray, right?
Oh, really? I haven't seen
Oscar
that.
Wilde, and now we're back to Ireland.
Yes,
I
we
love
are.
that, I love that story, though.
Yeah, that's a classic.
Book.
And
that book creeped me out so bad.
And check it out, the Oscar Wilde. I can't even remember where I read this, and I've been looking for this for a long time now. But I read that Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu, he lived on the south side of Marion Square. It was an affluent. It still is. It's more of a business district now. But he lived on Marion Square in the center of Dublin. And the Wilde family lived on the north side of the square. And I'd read somewhere that the Wilde children and the Le Fanu children, who would have been around the same age, used to play together.
Oh,
it's a small city.
Wow.
That's awesome.
Who would let their kids play with the Wilde children, though, really?
I know.
They have no manners. They're just crazy.
Bram Stoker, author of Dracula, used to come over to the Wilde house for parties.
Well, that's
awesome.
And you can then you take three authors of weird stories, right there. And you can see that Dublin had its own weird scene. I mean, obviously Oscar Wilde is probably into it, but but he is the area had its own occult author scene. Kind of.
Yeah, it's a hopping scene.
I mean, kind of like how we talk about the letters between Robert E. Howard and H.P. Lovecraft and the correspondence and so Stoker, you think, was very influenced by Le Fanu?
I think he was probably influenced by him. Yeah, there's not a smoking gun, but you can sort of smell you can smell the fire. Carmilla was Le Fanu's vampire story, and you can see sort of traces of that in Stoker's short story, which was an excised chapter of some sort called Dracula's Guest.
Okay.
Yeah, they're both set in the same place. But yeah, I mean, Dublin is it's a small city, even now. So these crossovers there's a ton of them.
Well, I was surprised when I visited Ireland that is there 5 million people on the island?
Yeah, not even that.
It's not even... Right, wow. I was thinking it was just a lot bigger and stuff like that. I'm like, how do they even make all that soap with only that many people?
I can see Wendy's shaking her head now too.
They don't make that there? Oh God, I feel like a jerk.
Oh my gosh.
So
no, they don't make the soap there. They just
your babes, Mike.
They don't actually make the soap there, Mike. They just get the smell.
Okay, so they get the smell
and then they
from
import
Ireland.
it to the factory.
Okay, good. That's how I love it. But right, so it's a small city. The people were, pollinating each other's stories and things, and that's a lot of our, paranormal themed literature. I mean, Bram Stoker set the tone of it. Dracula, and that's where we get all of our ideas about modern vampirism.
Yeah, I think he's a pivotal figure in horror literature for sure. He may not have written the best novel, but he's certainly written one of the most influential ones. I mean, there's fallout from his still happening. And
so much of our ideas of paranormal themes are shaped by what these guys did in the 19th century. And so that's why I kind of wanted to bring up the spiritual, how popular spiritualism was in the 19th century, and how that and people are still I was really surprised. I talked about interacting with mediums and stuff, and we've interviewed a couple of mediums in the past month on the show. Mm-hmm. I was surprised that those people still exist, that there's so many and they still exist. Like it wasn't just Miss Cleo, like wasn't the last person.
I'm seeing a man in your future, and I'm seeing a new baby.
I know Miss Cleo, like, oh yeah, and he's definitely cheating on you, and you're like, oh my god, and
somebody's incarcerated.
Yeah,
Maria Utskaya and the Wolfman, right?
Yeah, and well, I think I told Wendy this, Brian. I don't know if I ever told you this, that originally, like when the first internet crash happened, like 15 years ago in 2000, like I was doing music reviews for these websites, and I was making decent money, and it was great. And then all the money got pulled out of the internet, and I had to, find work. I had to get employment, and one of the things that I signed up for was being a psychic on the Miss Cleo line.
So horrible.
And I'm like, well, how bad can it be? And I went through the training. Like the whole thing. And the training was basically just several long emails of what tarot cards mean. It really was like, that was the training. And I talked to, a woman talks to you for like a half an hour. And she's like,
so sad.
I can do this from home. I'm helping people while I'm folding my laundry and get all this stuff. And I'm like, okay, but what happens when somebody's like, I want to know if my best friend is going to die of this disease, or
or like, is my husband cheating on me or something?
Right.
Like,
you can ruin a marriage by saying, well, the cards say yes, you better get his ass out of the house.
I don't know if like tarot card readers are necessarily predicting the future. I think a good tarot card reader is kind of going to give you a few things to think about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Something, like reading a horoscope. It's not necessarily going to tell you, what's going to happen, but it can give you food for thought, and you can come up with ways to sort of attach it to your own life.
It's a different form of analysis, and it's a framework for self-analysis.
I'll give it this.
Yeah, but I couldn't get
and
it past.
There's the loonies.
So I couldn't. I eventually didn't do it. I called in one night because you call in and then you set your phone up, and then I'm like, no, like I couldn't because I'm like not psychic. I'm just gonna be lying to somebody.
Then your name, your psychic name.
I didn't even think about having a psychic name.
Oh my gosh.
I'd like be, I don't know, the
mystical might
or the mysterious Magoo or something like that. I don't know.
It's like I had to. In high school I worked for a collection agency. And I had to have, a fake name for that. Because, you don't want people coming after you like, you're the one that ruined my life.
Right. So
you reported me to the credit agency.
What was your fake name, Wendy?
It was Lynn Hunt.
Okay.
That sounds made up.
Yeah.
It's totally unoriginal, but it was just because, my middle name is Lynn. And then there's a string quartet that a piece by Mozart that's called The Hunt that I really liked, and I was like, that sounds cool, whatever.
Well, and that sounds realistic.
Work there.
Right. I would have picked something like Pip Wafferschnaffer or something like that.
Well, that's the other thing, is that it has to be like easy to remember, because people sometimes you'd leave messages and you'd ask them to call you back, and they never would, of course, but
right. Like
if they did, you'd want them to be able to.
Hudson.
Yeah.
What was it?
I would have been Ernie Hudson, I think.
Right. And they're like, I loved you in Ghostbusters. No, but that's the thing. Like I would have picked something like that Dickens would have used for a name, and so immediately everybody like, your real name's not Pip, is it? And I'm like, well, what? How do you know? How do you know it's not? Okay, but spiritualism in the 19th century, and it's still
back on track.
It still exists. It's still a thing, and it was a really powerful force. I mean, what kind of influence did it have on Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Sherlock Holmes?
Yeah. Well, not just spiritualism too, but I mean to sort of to springboard back from the Wilde family. William Wilde, Oscar's father, was we'll call him an amateur Egyptologist. He traveled through Egypt at a time when people were sort of just swiping stuff and bringing them back with them. So William Wilde's house was filled with mummies. Well, not filled with. He had a few mummies.
Not just mummies out, like in all the closets. There's mummies.
But in the late 19th century, there would be parties, mummy unwrappings. People would come over, and it would be this sort of pseudo-scientific mummy unwrapping. Like, let's see what's inside this thing, and they would unwrap the mummies.
They'd have a party to unwrap a corpse. that they stole from the Middle East. God, you gotta love imperialism.
Wow. Like, I mean, that is really creepy.
This is the height of the British Empire, too, right?
Seriously.
The sun never sets on entitlement.
But I think spiritualism would have, it would have been around the same time that people would be coming over, and there would be sort of parties where you would have. I don't know when tarot became popular, but you would have mediums that would channel spirits and this sort of thing. It was sort of a popular pastime. This era of pseudoscience,
but also the era of, things must have felt like possibilities, and the world must have just felt very mysterious at the time, and had a very mysterious quality to it, and a mystical, spiritual, occult quality. And I think that's a fun time in which to live.
I think this is a bit like what Wendy was saying earlier, though, is sometimes when you have too many answers, you start craving a few more mysteries. And if you remember, what year was The Origin of Species published? Like, we're talking 1860-ish.
Right.
So it's and Le Fanu's story Green Tea was published in 1872, I think it was 1871. No, sorry, 1869. So right on the heels of these sorts of things, this is when you're having not only an explosion in scientific understanding, but also I think an explosion in pseudoscience, in people that are kind of trying to reintroduce a bit of mystery. Right,
and as attested to the popularity of these, occult stories, like you said, the vampire stories, and then Dracula, obviously huge. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, massively successful with Sherlock Holmes, and he would give,
which is a great contradiction too, Conan Doyle and his beliefs. In the fact that he came up with Sherlock Holmes.
Right, a man who would use deductive reasoning. And Sherlock Holmes would think Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was crazy. He'd be like,
he believed in fairies.
Yeah, like he thought, right.
He honestly believed in fairies.
Well, I have an interesting Doyle connection, I guess.
What's that?
Doyle from the Misfits or Conan Doyle?
Sorry. Nice.
Doyle from the Misfits. Okay.
Good one.
Everyone likes the Misfits. Sorry, Wendy.
That's right. No. I'm a fan too.
We are.
I think I've alluded to this in previous episodes, but when I was in high school, I did an AFS exchange to Switzerland one summer. I lived there with a host family, and the host family that I lived with, the grandfather was the caretaker for the castle that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle had lived in and owned.
Is this I forget the name of the Underwood?
You know what? I'd have to look. I have a whole picture album and everything, and I haven't looked at it in 20 years. But because I was really into castles, I was like, castles are awesome, and so they're like, sure. Oh, well, here, Gramps is the caretaker here, so they took us there, and my host sister and I they basically gave us the key, and we got to run around and explore it because it's only open for tours on scheduled times and dates, and it was just so cool, but it was also very strange. Just imagining someone actually living in a place like that. I mean, it had a dungeon, a real creepy dungeon, and
awesome.
It was just what you think of as a castle, in a story is exactly how it was. So he lived there, and it's just, at the time, I guess I didn't appreciate it probably as much as I would now, but I still thought it was...
you did. You got to explore, and what kid doesn't like to explore?
Right, and you got to explore the Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, his personal first of all, he had a personal castle. That's pretty sweet.
But, and it's huge and it's gorgeous.
But what I thought was cool about him is, he did lectures on spiritualism. He would really, he would go, and they talk about, he did a series of 7 lectures in New York City. And he was so convincing that some people killed themselves.
What?
People killed, we'll put a link to this. Actually, it's on Troy Taylor's website. The connection between Houdini and Arthur Conan Doyle. So we'll put a link to it in the show notes.
No idea.
And
that's a convincing speaker.
People killed themselves so they could get to see the next world.
Wow. What?
Yeah, one woman killed her children and drank a bottle of Lysol.
Oh my gosh. Why though? You're going to die anyway.
Right, because he was talking about the wonders of the next world and how great it's going to be. And they're like, well, screw it. We're going to take the shortcut.
I think somebody told me about that last night at the Frequency. They offered me something. They're like, dude, you can see the wonders.
Some Lysol? Oh, no.
The Lysol huffers. Well, this also would have been right after World War One, and there was another boom in spiritualism after that.
Because so many people died.
I think it sort of was part of the grieving process. So there's a huge interest in that, and I'm sure Conan Doyle, we won't say capitalized on it, but he was right there. I mean, he was a believer himself.
Yeah, he was into it. And the thing is, Harry Houdini wasn't a believer because after his mother died, he was searching for. He wanted to speak to her. He was upset. And there's another Wisconsin connection because Harry Houdini was born in Wisconsin. And
he was born in is he Hungarian? No, the family moved to Appleton, and he was raised there.
Okay.
If for anyone in the area, there's a great museum up there. They have the milk crate or the milk can.
Okay.
The mannequins. Yeah.
So visit there. I'm gonna have to go visit the Houdini museum.
We need to have a few
field trip.
little field trips. Yes.
Do some
live broadcasting from there and stuff.
Because we'll do a field trip to Camp Wanawalk, which is a spiritualist camp that has you can get readings. They have a religious service on Sunday, and then you stick around, and then they see the dead people around you.
Where's that?
Allison, where's Camp Wanawalk?
About an hour from the Dells.
About an hour from the Dells. My sister, my sister knows because she's been there. Okay.
Wait a minute. She just made this officially our first 4-person podcast.
She added in, so it's a 4-person. So Houdini was born in Hungary, moved to Appleton, and lived in Milwaukee for 3 years.
There you go.
So that's coming from Milwaukee ghosts expert Allison Jordan, who's assisting with the information today. Okay, but he was really into it, and he wanted to talk to his mom, and he missed her so bad, and him and Arthur Conan Doyle became friends. They had a lot of disagreements because Houdini was a debunker and Conan Doyle was a believer.
This is like the X-Files.
Yeah, it kind of is. It kind of is.
Right. But, they should have had their own show.
Right.
Yeah.
But I guess people probably wouldn't have watched the X-Files because with Houdini and Conan Doyle, because Conan Doyle wasn't as cute as David Duchovny. And you can ask girls. There's a huge population of people who watch the X-Files just because they think David Duchovny was cute.
I was going to say one of them could have just worn a red wig.
Right. Also, okay, but here's the thing. There's going to be a TV show.
That's right.
About the friendship between Harry Houdini and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle.
Oh, that's cool.
And it's going to be on, Fox just approved it. And 10-episode series to Fox. And it's called Houdini and Doyle. And it's going to go into...
Best of friends.
So it's going to be like the X-Files we were just talking about. So that... and they did the House and the Librarians. That's the people who are doing this show did those shows. That's coming from Allison, too, helping out with little notes past.
That's awesome.
So that's an interesting thing. So anyway, just to kind of make that connection to pop culture today, we're still interested in these characters from 100 years ago.
Yeah. Well, what was the movie? Was it The Prestige? Or there were 2 movies about magicians.
Yeah, one was
Prestige, and the one with Paul Giamatti,
The Illusionist.
They came out right at the same time, but I think The Prestige was the one that I really liked. That was the one with Tesla, and it was his technology that helped make the...
Doesn't David Bowie play Tesla in The Prestige? Yeah.
That's why I liked it so much. Okay, never mind.
Yeah,
Sorry.
That's a given. Plus it has Hugh Jackman and he's dreamy.
Truth.
But no,
and
Michael Caine, who's in his hundreds now, I think.
Yes, right. No, Michael Caine will never die. But
just the fact that movie, although it was fiction, inspired by the same cast of characters, I guess, that I would think these guys would fit into. So,
well, and the thing is, they're also, the way that I found out that Harry Houdini was into spiritualism and debunking, that was from a TV show called Voyagers. And Voyagers was basically where you had this little kid who was a history expert, and you had this guy that was part of an organization that traveled through time and corrected history when it went wrong. And they had like a fob pocket watch that would say it was red if they were in the wrong, history was still wrong and it showed red. And then it would show green was that they accomplished their mission and got history back on the right spot.
That's cool.
So they had an episode.
Like Quantum Leap.
That's what when Quantum Leap first came on, I was like, this is just like Voyagers when they're correcting history.
Oh, that's funny because I was just talking to a friend of ours. He was telling me about a book he read when he was a child that there was this path you could go down and you go back in time and hunt dinosaurs. But if you stepped off the path, it would change history.
Oh,
so it was like the path was the safe
That's the Ray
zone.
Bradbury story. It's called
Distant Sound of Thunder.
Oh, cool. Okay, so thank you. Because I need to read that because I just thought that was a really neat concept. And I apparently haven't read that yet. So, but it reminds me of the green and red light, like, okay, not okay.
That's right. No, you should definitely read The Distant Sound of Thunder, but don't watch the movie. They made a movie about 10 years ago, and it's terrible.
Yeah, okay.
So don't sweat it. But
thanks for the heads up on that.
You'll enjoy the story. So the guy that starred in Voyagers, and he's the guy that said that blanks can't kill you. He was joking around on the set of a TV show that he was on after Voyagers was canceled. He put a gun to his head filled with blanks, shot it, and the blast fractured his skull, drove a bone fragment the size of a quarter into his brain, and killed him. And so I remember hearing that story as a kid, that this actor killed himself.
Absolutely horrible.
Yeah. So,
oh my God, that just makes me like ill thinking about that.
Killed himself with blanks. That's just another little interesting trivia. And I don't know if anybody ever tried to talk to him from beyond the grave. But they'd probably be like, why did you put the gun with blanks to your head?
You could have just told us. You didn't have to prove it.
Right. Couldn't you might have
could have used a watermelon or something. You didn't have to put it on your head.
Couldn't you have talked to the prop coordinator? Like he'd have been like, no. Anyway, so that's just a little story about John Eric Hexum and Harry Houdini, Arthur Conan Doyle. Anyway, we're running out of time, so we just want to thank Brian for joining us today to talk a little bit about the foundations of our modern paranormal stories and where they come from with some of these Victorian authors.
Yeah,
and enjoyed it.
We have a lot to talk about, so maybe you can join us again in the future sometime. If you care to.
Cool. It'd be good fun.
Also, Brian, let's tell people where they can find you. What books you got next and what they can get with Swan River Press.
Oh, yeah. Well, you mean swanriverpress.ie is the website. There's collections and novels by modern ghost story and writers of strange literature that you can find there. Have a look. Maybe you'll see something you like. Okay. And is there anything you got coming out new that you want to push? Not really, Mike. Not really. Okay. Well, make sure you get the Swan River Press, and make sure I've read The Bleeding Horse and Other Ghost Stories, and I think it's a fantastic book. So I heartily recommend it. And there's a link in the show notes, and you can pick up a copy of that today. And the show notes are at othersidepodcast.com/36. Cool. All right. Cool. Could I wrap the show up, Mike and Wendy, with just one last connection? I think is pretty cool. We'll bring it right full circle. Please do. Is that Houdini and Lovecraft have a connection as well. And Lovecraft actually ghost wrote a story for Houdini that appeared in Weird Tales magazine. It's called Under the Pyramids. All right. Well, we'll find that and put a link to that in the show notes too. Awesome. Is it a good story? Is it a good story? No. Okay. You don't even have to put this on the show. Right. All right. Thanks so much, Brian. Nice talking to you. And now let's hear a song. Love it. And this episode's song is inspired by J. Sheridan Le Fanu's classic vampire novella, Carmilla, a tale of secret sapphic love and, of course, good old Victorian prudence. So here's our track, Carmilla. Proper little misses, sharing little bloody kisses, and every fire starts from just a spark.
Our secret experiments upon your angel innocence. It don't matter what you look like in the dark. Just you wait until the sun goes down and down, down, down. When she whispers, you're hers forever now. Come in. Sweet little tweaks, I'm getting sick of always pretending. Just a few more sleepless nights, I know you'll hold our secrets tight. I'll miss our visits more than anything. Just you wait until the sun goes down and down, down, down. When she whispers, you're hers forever now. Come in.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. You can find us online at othersidepodcast.com. Until next time, see you on the other side.